from Bolt. Did Bolt have a second quote? You made it seem like he had two quotes.
Yeah, the other one I wanted to talk about because they always get him on a bunch of different topics here, and it was about running in the U.S. because obviously Eugene is hosting World Championships, and he says, "quote The U.S. is one of those places where track and field is not that big," said Bolt. So the fact that we have brought it to the U.S. now is very important for the athletes to perform and really get eyes on the sport. And he says he'd love to be part of it, no matter what is going on. I will be there. That's interesting because he never raced there. We never saw Bolt at Hayward Field throughout his career, which was really disappointing, really sad that we never got him at Pre-Classic. I understand Nike Showcase; they're not putting the Puma athlete there, or they couldn't pay him enough to get him there. But it just seems like that should have happened throughout his career. You want to see Bolt at Hayward Field, but it's also interesting. He's correct here too. And when he says the U.S. is one of those places where track and field is not that big, that describes most of the world where it's not that big. His home country is the exception, but it's interesting. You have the biggest guy in the sport talking about where the meet is being hosted next year and saying it's not that big of a place and that people need to show up next year in order to get more eyes on the sport.
Yeah, I mean, where's the lie, right? He's not lying here. And also, is he kind of taking a dig at US right here? Or is he just being honest?
I think he's being honest, and he follows American sports. He follows football. I've seen him tweet about basketball and post about. I mean, he played in that All Star game before too. He's aware of the global sports landscape, and he's aware of the American sports landscape. So he knows that. I mean, the one thing I would push back on is the idea that the athletes performing well will really get eyes on the sport. I don't know what it would take to really get more eyes on the sport or similar amount of eyes on the sport as the Olympics. I mean, last year we had Magic Johnson tweeting about it. We had, and he didn't know when the Olympic trials were. Um, he eventually found out, but I don't think he went, despite USATF and everybody trying to get him to go to the Olympic trials. Richardson obviously drew a ton of interest there. The one advantage to it being in the US from a marketability and viewership standpoint is just time zones. You get it in a time zone where people will come across it. You can't expect people who are not diehard track fans to wake up at 6 in the morning or stay up till midnight to watch. So that's the one advantage. More US media outlets will probably go and cover it because it's closer. So it'll show up more. It'll be in people's timelines or on people's feeds more. But I think the big thing is it just being on in a time when people can consume it.
Do you think like an outlet like ESPN will be there? I don't think so. You think ESPN will send a reporter
Sure, sure. Maybe not for the whole meet, but they'll be there the first couple
just for the
days.
100? Yeah.
Write the 100 story. Maybe they'll do a feature about the women's 400-meter hurdles. There's there's a fine out. There are a lot of sports going on at the same time, right? But there's also few opportunities to capture something like that, and I think that is worth a story or two. Are they going to be doing 3,000 words into the steeple? No, it's not going to be that
Yeah.
level of coverage, but they'll go there and they'll look for a star. It'll be a good opportunity. It'll be a cheap opportunity, relatively speaking, because usually someone might go to Worlds. It'll be a cheap opportunity to get a head start on the Olympic coverage, right? Because they'll be able to get the background stuff, get a little bit of information, get the knowledge necessary. I don't know if there's going to be a ton of outlets going, but it would make sense to me. But the idea that someone could do something though that would be enough to shake up the sports scene in the U.S. is that's a tall ask, right? Is just like, run run 9.5 in the 100 or something. Cindy McLaughlin, if she breaks 51 in the 400-meter hurdles, then everybody's going to tune in. I don't know if there's a number or a performance that's going to bring people around. I just think people will stumble across it on their dial and maybe they'll watch it or see it on their
Yeah,
timeline and then maybe they'll tune in.
I think the problem here is kind of when I connected to the cross country problem is that even when we had like the big Shikari moments, like her big build up to her race and pre and the reactions after, I think the problem is all of these moments are so short, right? It's just 10 seconds long or a minute long or 5 minutes long if it's a mile or whatever. But it's not just so short there, but it's so short in the year because we see an incredible football play week in and week out. Every
Yeah.
weekend, there's a new highlight of some crazy football move or a new basketball dunk or crazy game winning shot that we see every other day.
Yeah.
Track, if you're only going to see these great moments in July of 2022, and we're not
Yeah.
going to see them the next weekend and the weekend after for like a 3 month long process or 4 month or 5 month, whatever, it's going to be hard to get people hooked. It's hard to hook someone in on just one
One race. Yeah.
championship. You need to find a way to, because a lot of like even the NBA, like which I follow a lot, like what keeps me hooked is there's constantly something happening in that
Yeah.
sport, whether
Yeah.
it's free agency and trades during the off season, but every week there's like so much content around the
Mhm.
NBA of people playing basketball that it keeps me hooked for a long period of time going into the playoffs. Track, it's kind of hard to stay hooked because we're now going into like what, like
Mhm.
October, September, October, November. We're gonna go into like a 3.5, maybe 4 month long
Yeah.
time of like no track. And for like the stars, we're talking maybe even longer, like 6 months. Like
Yeah.
there are some stars who are gonna skip indoor who aren't gonna run
Mhm.
until like March, and their last
Mhm.
race was in September. And we're supposed to like that's a long time for us to like have no like content or beat around performances for some stars. But
Do you do you
you know,
think so? Last year, USATF put on a bunch of meets, and a lot of them got on TV, and I think that was just because the pandemic, right? We saw the ones at Mount Sac, we saw the ones at Hayward. Do you think they will do or should do a similar type of lead up to put stuff in front of people's eyes in April, May, and June to provide the type of season, even though we know it's not a real season and people can opt in and opt out, that would get people at least familiar with some of these names?
I mean, they could say they're going to do it, but I don't think they will.
Do you think they
I
should?
I don't. I think they should,
Mhm.
but like we see these like pop up meets come and go. We think it's like a new foundation, and they might do it for a year, two, maybe three if you're lucky, and then it
Yeah.
ends. And like we constantly think this is the new structure of our sport, but in the end, it always dies off, and it all just resorts back to running in college meets because that college meets will happen no matter what because you have a
Yeah.
university paying for it with their
But what I'm
football
saying is
money.
you only need it for 1 year. This only works. I'm saying just as a hype machine for Eugene 2022. So you figure out 2023 and beyond later. I just think if you just focus on one event, just say the 100, men's and women's 100, just, and that's part of the reason why this would never work is because it's difficult to just throw out a bunch of resources to one event at the expense of others. And you guaranteed Richardson's appearance at 3 or 4 meets, right, in the US. And those meets were all going to be on television, and you put together the best fields that you could around her. You try to get Shelly Ann or Elaine Thompson raw. And on the men's side, you lock in Curley, Bromell, Baker, that whole big group there, Bednarik, right? Coleman when he comes back, Lyles, and um, DeGrasse, and you try to get them in 4 meets, try to get them in 3 meets, just so you have maybe one thing per month or one thing every a couple times before you get to the actual world championship. So people have just, hey, I saw those guys 2 times. And then, as a sweetener, you put DK Metcalf in lane 8 every time. You just throw him in there as bait so that